I've recently done some videos about breakthrough symptoms. I've talked about negative and cognitive symptoms. I've never done a video telling you guys about the negative and cognitive symptoms that I still deal with. The reason I think that this is an important conversation is because even with medication and treatment and being a more high functioning person with schizophrenia, I still have a lot of negative and cognitive symptoms. And I'll also talk a little bit about how my cognitive and negative symptoms have changed over time. But I spend so much time talking about the hallucinations, the delusions, the paranoia. I want to talk about the other things that may have a bigger impact on my daily life because I deal with them more now that I'm medicated than I do those other symptoms. So let's get into it. So just a reminder for anyone who hasn't seen some of my previous videos talking about this, negative and cognitive symptoms are things that people experience that affect their everyday life. This can be with a severe mental illness. Specifically with schizophrenia, it's things like issues with memory, issues with speech, not being able to communicate, fatigue, issues with cognitive functioning or memory. These are all things that people experience that I didn't even know were symptoms of schizophrenia until late into my diagnosis. I think when someone's first diagnosed with schizophrenia, it's so important to doctors and psychiatrists and caregivers and loved ones to make sure that we have the primary symptoms that are causing the most distress taken care of first. And when I was first experiencing symptoms or when I was first diagnosed, the things I was really struggling with were paranoid thoughts, delusions, constant auditory and visual hallucinations. And that's what antipsychotics are for. That's what medication is for, is to help with those things. But then I went years, being on medication and getting better and having less of those symptoms, and I was still struggling a lot. And I felt like I was failing. I felt like I was just lazy or I couldn't do things. And it was really disheartening because I thought it was my fault. I didn't realize that they were additional symptoms I was struggling with. So the big one for me, and I've talked about this recently on the Skits and Giggles podcast that I do with Kit Wallace, I really struggle with memory. Both long and short-term memory. It's really hard for me to go back and when I do my schizophrenic story times, the reason I can't post those as often as I would like to is I can't just sit down, make a list and remember. They come and go. So when I do those story times, it's because I'm usually sitting down, just doing whatever, and one of those memories will come back. And that's such a foggy part of my journey because I was not only in psychosis, but I was also struggling with addiction. And so that in itself is a very hard period of my life to remember, even while I was in jail or in early treatment. There's a lot of that I just don't have up there. And once I got medicated, I did gain some of that back, right? I started being able to remember more, and I really thought it would get back to 100%. And that's, for me, my constant struggle is the frustration that my memory is not what it used to be, and I can't do things that I used to be able to do. For example, when I went back to college, test taking or school, stuff like that, all of that was a lot harder because I didn't have a good memory. I think that leads into the other bigger struggle that I have, which is cognitive delay. You guys don't get to see it because I have an amazing editor. I definitely don't have the cognitive ability I did in high school. And unfortunately with schizophrenia, that is what happens, is if someone doesn't get treatment or medication, the longer a person goes struggling with psychosis or a psychotic break, the more damage it can do to their brain, and the harder it is to regain that cognitive ability. And so, although I've been able to learn how to speak and communicate better, that's something I still don't have full grasp of, is my memory and being able to have full cognitive ability. Now, since I mentioned speaking, I do think it's really important to talk about this because people assume that because I'm well-spoken, that it's just been like that since my diagnosis. A lot of people don't realize that when I was diagnosed, I was basically nonverbal. It was very hard for me to communicate. I chose not to talk a lot because I didn't know how to put what I was feeling to words. I used to struggle a lot with word salad, where I knew what I was trying to say, but I couldn't get it out. And so if you would have told me 10 years ago that I was going to be standing in front of audiences of 1,000 people or sharing my story online to millions of people, I wouldn't have believed you because I could barely communicate to my wife or my mom. So although people get to see me now as a very articulate, well-spoken person, this has been a lot of progress to get to this point. This is not something that happened overnight, and I don't want people to get discouraged if they're struggling in that area themselves. It's definitely something that I dealt with, and it's not out of the norm. And it's something I put a lot of work into to be able to get to the level of clarity and ability to share my story that I'm at today. There are a lot of other things that will come and go with my negative and cognitive symptoms. So some of the things I still experience, I still get a lot of fatigue. There are days where I struggle to get out of bed, or I struggle to take care of myself. One of the things I dealt with a lot early on that I still have issues with occasionally is personal hygiene. It was really hard to get up and shower and brush my teeth and do all that. And I do really well with it now because I'm more high functioning and I'm able to do that. But as you guys know, I take a lot of breaks from social media, and usually that's because I'm struggling to take care of myself, or I'm struggling with personal hygiene. I'm struggling getting out of bed. I take more social media breaks than most people because I realize that I'm a person living with mental illness, and I've accepted that I'm going to have bad days. As a lot of you know, I talk a lot about medication when it comes to getting help and getting treatment. And unfortunately, as far as I know, there's not a lot out there for these negative and cognitive symptoms. I know there are things in the work. There's a lot of newer medications that are showing signs that they could be helpful for those symptoms, but it is something that people with schizophrenia, even if they're very high functioning and they're medicated and they're doing well, negative and cognitive symptoms can still be there, and they can still affect anyone who's struggling with this diagnosis. I specifically remember meeting with a patient and their caregivers, and their caregivers were really frustrated. And they said, what do we do if our loved one with schizophrenia doesn't want to get up, or they don't want to take care of themselves, or they can't even clean their room? And I told them, I said, those are common signs of negative symptoms, and they're actually really common, and they're not talked about enough. And this was the first time that the caregiver had heard of negative symptoms. And my hope is that by talking about this more, we can make sure that people realize this is still a part of schizophrenia. This is still a part of the diagnosis. It's not the fault of the person who's struggling. And that's how I felt for years. So I hope that this helps anyone out there who might still be struggling with negative symptoms. I don't have a lot in terms of coping mechanisms. The best thing I can do is recommend that you talk to other peers, talk to people who are going through it, find out how they cope. I found a lot of my coping mechanisms through peer support, through NAMI. And so that's a huge way that I was able to start navigating some of these. But to this day, I still struggle. And I still take time off, and I still really want to make sure that we're talking about negative and cognitive symptoms, not just the positive symptoms, not just hallucinations, delusions, paranoid thoughts. Schizophrenia is more than that, and we need to be talking about every aspect. Now, I didn't talk about all of the cognitive and negative symptoms, so definitely take some time to look those up. That way you can better understand what symptoms might be affecting you. You can even ask your doctor or psychiatrist more about negative or cognitive symptoms, and they might be able to help you better understand your own experience with those. As always, I want to thank you guys so much for hanging out, listening. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. Be sure to like and subscribe. Also, be sure to check out the Skits and Giggles podcast that I do every week with Kit Wallace. You can find it on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Also, check out my book, Minds Over Meetings. It's about mental health and mental illness in the workplace, and you can find that on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and plenty of other places. Thank you guys again so much for watching, and just a reminder, my name's Kody. Don't worry, I'm real.